All right, folks. Hi there. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Megan Hickey. I serve as the Student Involvement Specialist. I work in our Office of Student Involvement and support our family programming. And so here we are in our first spring session of Pacer Family Nights. We know that there's a lot going on with the concept of financial aid and how to plan ahead for the next semester as we're looking at students returning for the fall, as well as how students can be employed while they're on campus. So we felt like this was a good time to kind of share out that information. So I have our Director of Financial Aid, Denisha Newby, with me here tonight. She'll be kind of chatting about the financial aid side of things, and then I'll actually take some time and chat about some of the roles that we have on campus that are currently hiring for students to apply for. And then we'll have time at the end for questions. I know folks, when they registered, had some questions, so we have them in the back of our minds, but if we don't answer them explicitly, go ahead and drop them in the chat and we'll just return to them at the end. Wanted to give another plug for one of our other Pacer Family Nights coming up later on in the spring semester. We will have one for moving off of campus. So if you have a student that's currently living on campus and this might be their first go round with living on campus, and you're wondering what that looks like to move off, I'll have that April 16th. So feel free to join us and register for that on the Pacer Family Portal. And then one more shameless plug, because I know we have more pressing matters to kind of chat about. We have our second ever Peace Pacer 5K happening on campus March 28th. It's going to be a really exciting time. We're looking to grow both our volunteer pool and our runners. So if you are a runner, please join us. If you are not a runner, we would love volunteers. We want people to direct the route for our runners. I've posted something in the Pacer Family Portal for that. So if you're looking for something to do and join us on 15 East Peace Street, that would be a great way to join us in the month of March. So thanks for listening to my spiel. As a note, I will have this recorded and kind of have this up available on the Pacer YouTube channel, so you can always return to that. But I'll go ahead and kick it over to Denisha. Thanks again for being here with us, Denisha.
Thank you so much for having me. Good evening, everyone. And hopefully this session will um, answer your questions and also help you to navigate, again, what is coming up and what maybe you can, what you need to do next steps as far as planning for next academic year. Um, as she stated, we'll, if you can, put your questions in the chat, because hopefully I'll get to all the ones. I did get the list. And if not, we'll definitely answer those for you as best we can. All right. So we're going to kind of talk about applying for aid, the renewal process, just making sure, for next academic year, how to renew that, some of the things that we look at in renewing that, and hopefully talk about, how numbers might change. Also, a bit about maybe applying for additional scholarships for next academic year and if there is a change. So those are kind of the big topics that we will go over. Of course, every year we encourage all families to complete the free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA form, on studentaid.gov. And this is something that we ask you to do each year, and we'll go over the different funds that it's required to do versus not required, but it's nice to just have it on file in case you do need to tap into other resources. I even find that some scholarships actually ask for a copy of your student aid report that's from the FAFSA form. So it's great to already have that in place. Again, it comes out every year. The new one is out for the 26-27 year. So when you think about it, when is the student actually in classes? So starting fall is the 26 through 27 year. So that's available now. It came out in October. We actually just started to bring those in, and we will start processing those for our returning students, hopefully the middle of April. So definitely they'll have that returning information before they leave for the summer. We do have a priority deadline of March 15th to have that in to start processing it, because sometimes we do require additional documentation. And it's usually pretty easy to upload that information. We give you step-by-steps on how to do that. You do use your same ID and password each year. So your student has an ID, an FSA ID, and the family member or contributor also has an FSA ID. So you're going to use that one. To be honest, I feel like sometimes it takes a longer process to remember what your ID was than to actually fill out the form. So sometimes it's tied to an email that you don't use anymore. So they do have different ways that you can reactivate that if needed. I suggest the student starts their portion and then they invite the parent to be the contributor, and then to finish their portion. And the nice thing about that is that one, your student doesn't necessarily directly see your, tax information and all that stuff. And sometimes the student doesn't know some of those things. So definitely have that conversation, have them start their portion, so that you can contribute your portion. So definitely get that done as soon as possible. Again, March 15th is our priority deadline. That just helps us to be set up to get the awards out in time if there's needed documentation, if there's other processing, that we have time to do that. When we're talking about some of those PEACE awards that the student already has, thinking about any merit awards, was presidential, whether it's a transfer scholarship, whatever that is, the community service, those are renewable each year. So basically there's no renewing criteria. As long as your student is still enrolled here and doing well academically and meeting all the standards, which we'll go over that in a second, then that is renewed each year. The big thing is there's not generally a renewal criteria. So let's say your student had the presidential and they had a 3.8 or whatever that was. They don't have to maintain that GPA. Many of our students do, but sometimes, things change a little bit. So again, that is renewable. What helps us to kind of make sure that rolls on there is by having that FAFSA form, but that's still not required for the merit and leadership awards. But it does help us in our processing to know, and to be able to set up the student's account correctly. The PEACE Assistance Grant or work study, those PEACE awards do require the FAFSA form. So again, it's important, if possible, just to do the FAFSA form, even if you don't tap into some of the federal awards that were possibly offered to you. We highly suggest you continue to do the FAFSA form, because you're just considered for all opportunities and not discounting or counting yourself out of certain opportunities. When you're thinking about federal aid programs, again, many of them, almost all of them, do require that FAFSA form each year, a new FAFSA form. So whether your student tapped into the federal Stafford loans, whether you did the Parent Plus loan, whether there was the Pell Grant, those words at COG, those all require that FAFSA form. So again, and there's nothing that you have to necessarily do for them. Once we get the information, we'll go ahead and process that. And then, of course, when you do have your new offer letter, you'll see all that listed on there on the student's PacerNet. North Carolina as well. So if you have the North Carolina grant, they have a North Carolina need-based scholarship, and they have forgivable loans as well, which that application just came out, and we did send information to the students about applying for that. But those do require a FAFSA form as well. So the new FAFSA form needs to be on file. A person did ask about the qualifications for keeping the North Carolina residency. So they do have a question and answer. They do specifically look at how you answered the residency status on the FAFSA form. So they're not only looking at the student of you saying on there that the student is a resident of North Carolina, is currently a resident, but also that parent or contributor. So if you happen to move out of state, you could be at risk of losing that North Carolina need-based scholarship. Let's say you didn't get it last year, but you plan on applying for it in future years. Basically, they're looking at if you filed North Carolina taxes, if you have voter registration, driver's license. So they have the accessibility to determine whether you have those things which make you a North Carolina resident. Definitely, if you have questions about that, the RDS application, I can show you where there's a link on the student's PacerNet to get more information about that. Usually that's directly with that state association to help you with that process. But generally, as long as you're not moving around or anything like that, you'll continue to get that, and it does have some income restrictions, and they determine that each year. So when your student, after they've done the FAFSA form, they will get an email. And like I said, we're hoping that'll be the middle to end of April or so, that they'll get an email saying, congratulations, your financial aid offer notifications available for you to view. So they're going to go on their PacerNet and they're going to log in. They're going to click on self-service and then financial aid. So on there, this screen is going to come up, and I'm going to reference the screen a lot because this has a lot of links to a lot of different areas where you might be seeking information. So at this point, they can review and accept their offer. And just because they click review and accept, they're more just acknowledging that they've seen it. That doesn't mean that they are accepting any loans in their name, in your name, by simply reviewing and accepting it. There's other steps needed for that process, but it's basically saying, hey, I've seen it. I know it's there. I've clicked on it and I've received some information. On the offer notification, there's a couple things to kind of take a look at. We do try to list out the differences between the scholarships and grants. So hopefully you'll see those things that you saw in previous years. So that's their transfer scholarship or whatever scholarship they did have. You'll also see any federal grants and state grants and institutional grants. We are working on, there was a question about adjustment in scholarships and grants for next year. We are working on a plan to try to make some adjustments for that. So hopefully, again, when you get that offer notification, you'll see that possible difference. If there are changes in circumstances, we'll kind of go over how to report that information and how we can kind of help the families as much as we can to kind of come up with some additional options. So also on this offer notifications towards the bottom, it's going to tell the student what next steps they do need to take if they want to activate anything. So every year the student does have to accept their federal loans if they want to activate them, because we don't make the assumption that just because they used them the previous year that they actually need them this year. Maybe there was an additional scholarship that they received, or maybe they're moving off campus, right? Or they're moving home, right? Or whatever that is. And so they might not need as much aid that they might have needed their first year. So they do have to accept their loans. They don't have to do the master promissory or entrance counseling, but they do have to accept their loans or reduce them or whatever the amount that they actually want to take. The same thing for the parent loan. If the parent does want to apply for a new parent loan, again, that's something just by the student activating this and accepting the offer, they're not automatically accepting a parent loan in the parent's name. When we talk about parent loans, this is an application that the parent actually has to complete themselves if they choose to do that. So when we're offering the parent loan, we're going based on the cost of attendance. So that's estimated tuition, estimated housing, and generally on-campus housing, and miscellaneous and personal. But if you know, like she stated, maybe you're moving off campus and it's a shared apartment that, you don't have as much of an expense or more of a shared expense than living in the residence hall. So maybe you don't need as much. So you actually can say, well, I want to borrow this amount in the parent loan. We might say it's 10,000, but you might say, oh, we only need 5. Again, that's a placeholder. And then we'll also talk about other things that you can apply for in case you did not want to do the parent loan. But let's say you do want to apply for the parent loan. There is a link again on this main site that your students can send to you, but it is the federal site, that's studentaid.gov, and you're going to click on grants and loans and then apply for the Parent Plus loan. It is credit-based. If for some reason the parent is denied, then the student can be considered for an additional loan in their name. And it depends on the amount. So anywhere from another $4,000 to $6,000 or so for the year. Again, that is an option, and we can certainly discuss that with you and your family if that's something that you wanted a bit more information about. If your family did not want to do the parent loan, but you notice there is a gap or you have a perception of a gap, then the other option that is listed on here is a private loan through an outside lender. So the parent loan is in the parent's name. The parent cannot transfer that to the student. It has a fixed interest rate and it's through the federal government. The private loan is in the student's name. but the student would need a credit-worthy endorser or co-signer for that loan. And there's different options as you can choose as far as the interest rate. Sometimes they have a co-signer release. So it can be, let's say, a co-signer doesn't have to be a parent. It can be a grandparent, a family friend, or someone else. So there is a link on, again, their student center that they can click for more information. This is just a screenshot of some of the prospective lenders that they give you. So this site doesn't give preference to any, but they're giving you options. So again, you're looking at, okay, do I want a fixed or a variable? So maybe having these conversations with your student. Maybe you already have a relationship with a particular servicer or lender. Some families go through their credit union for a private student loan. So again, you do have that choice. But there are certainly different variety of options. And like I said, some of them have different perks and benefits to them. So some of them let you pay on the interest, right? To have a lower interest rate while the student's in school. Most of them do have that option, just like the parent loan, to not make payments while the student is in school. So again, based on your relationship or your conversation or what you've set up with the student determines basically how you best as a family choose to move forward. And some families I see do a bit of both. So they say, well, we'll take a part in the parent loan, but we want you to have a part in the private loan. So maybe if we say you need $10,000, you say, well, I'll do 5,000 in the parent loan, and then I want you to do 5,000 in the private loan, or maybe 5,000 that you find another outside scholarship, right? So however, every family is different. So how you choose to finance, or what works best for you, is what works best for you and your family. So I just wanted to show you an example of what is linked, and it kind of updates. And again, it has their phone numbers and information that families can get a bit more information. I do like to talk about if there are any changes. So let's say when you did the FAFSA form, it used 2004, I believe, tax information, right? 2024, sorry, tax information, and things change, life changes, circumstances changes, sometimes employment changes, family structure changes, things of that nature. You can do a special circumstance appeal form with our office. Again, sorry, going back one, that is also listed on their checklist. So that is the second from the bottom there, that appeal process that you and your family can fill that out. Basically, if you feel like there's a significant financial change. I think a question was with medical and dental expenses, what's the number? So it really just depends on the circumstance. Generally, with medical and dental expenses, that's going to increase your cost. So therefore, that kind of gives you more room to borrow additional funds. It does not normally adjust the amount that you will get in grants and scholarships. So it kind of has a little bit different repercussions. But again, we can kind of talk about that if that's a question. So definitely at any time during the academic year, if something changes, what we would try to look at is what will the new financial picture look like for you and your family while the student's in school. So whether that's looking at all of 2025 tax information, maybe that's more reflective than 24 was. Or if there's a change in now in 26 and you can project what your income is going to be in 26, we can use current data and information to adjust the FAFSA to more reflect your 26 income. So we really try to work with you on that to make that adjustment. And then we actually adjust your FAFSA, and then we kind of help determine, if there's federal aid that changes or institutional aid or a bit of both. So definitely it's a case-by-case scenario, but again, it has to be a significant financial change. And so a lot of times I'll have conversations or quick Zoom calls or Google Meet conversations with families, and they explain their circumstance, and I can kind of determine what's the best route to go in moving forward. So one of the things that's kind of important that, and I kind of referenced this earlier, was in order for your student to continue to receive aid, to keep their scholarships, to keep their aid, they do have to maintain satisfactory academic progress. So basically, this is where we measure their percentage of completion versus attempted. So if they take 2 classes and they pass both classes, they're going to have 100% completion. And that's normally the case, right? But we know, again, circumstances and things happen. Sometimes a class doesn't work out as, as we thought. Maybe the timing was bad. Maybe maybe just things didn't work out. And so we do have to have a federal standard that the student has to complete a certain percentage of classes that they attempt. And that is successful completion. So even if they fail it, again, they have to complete a certain percentage that they attempt. So that is one of the standards of maintaining that scholarship. If there is a concern, your student does get a warning term before they're actually canceled and not eligible to receive any of their federal, university, or state aid. The students can certainly appeal and say, I've got tutoring, I've changed my schedule, I'm not, and some students work a bit, they're like, I'm not working as much, or I've cut certain things off. I had a student who told me, they chose not to, they sit out a sport because they were doing 2 sports. So they decided to sit. I mean, so again, whatever is working for them, they just sometimes have to tell us what that is, and we kind of monitor them on that. There's also a minimum GPA. And again, if that student is not is at risk of not being close to that, we do send them a warning. And I think the GPA is a 1.9 or 2.0 or in that realm. So generally it's lower compared to what their merit awards were when they initially. But again, if students have questions about that, if they drop one class or they don't do well in one class, this is not going to cancel them. It's normally a longer pattern. And so just kind of keeping that in mind, and you as a family, since you're here, of course, you're invested in your students' academics, to encouraging them to take the right classes, right? Not trying to overload themselves, and then taking those classes and doing well in those classes. Another option for you, because I know some of the questions were, what are our other aid options? We do have a great tool that we as an institution have for financial literacy and for scholarships, and it's called iGrad. The students have access to this using their PEACE login. And the nice thing about iGrad is it has different financial education. So I think there's short courses that kind of helps them with budgeting and managing, even looking forward to retirement, even though they might have a small job now, how to kind of help them in the future. But it also has a scholarship search, and many of our students do use it. So it helps them in all types of areas. It's not just for college students per se. Many institutions use this platform for different things, so that's kind of nice. But the scholarship component is something that's really helpful. They also help them with other areas that we already have on campus, like job searches and budgeting and financing. But sometimes we know that our students like to hear it from a different voice, right? And they kind of do a bit better by hearing it in a different tone. With the scholarship search, it does have different outside scholarships. It has different bases that they can search for, and they have monthly drawings. So definitely, I would highly encourage your student to kind of look at that and try to apply for some of those scholarships, because again, that we have a lot of students who do bring outside scholarships every year with them. So definitely we want that could help with that bottom line of additional expenses. Again, they have some finance stuff in there. And I know even we're working with some instructors to offer this to families and to students, just to help them with like extra credit and things like that, because these are great skills to kind of have. Also, when you're helping your student look for different scholarships, kind of think about places like within your community. So again, a faith-based organization, think about fraternal organizations, and they're not just for new incoming freshmen. When my son was in college, I remember there was a scholarship that we had found that they wanted him to be a junior in college because they wanted him to be a more established student, closer to graduating, to help. Civic organizations, if you're a resident of North Carolina, They have a North Carolina Foundation, which has a good amount of scholarships. And this is the right time to look for those because many of them have like an end of February, middle of March deadline. So again, this is the time to look at that. But scholarships and organizations have their own timeline period. So it just really depends on them, but to continue to keep an eye out for them. I've seen, different like Rotary clubs. I've seen them from different organizations, even parents, employers at times, civic organizations. So there's a lot of opportunities out there. And again, once you bring that scholarship to us, that helps applies to that student's bill. If the bill is paid, then we can either reduce, let's say, loan funds or give that money back to the student. So again, that is another way to help supplement some of those upcoming costs. And we also do send things to students in there's a student newsletter that goes out. So we try to make people aware of different ones that we know, like so let's say through the state or a foundation that maybe have contacted us. We also list them on our door for our office, different opportunities for students. So we really try to make students aware of different scholarship opportunities. That's the end of my formal presentation. I think that the only thing I think that there was a question about that I might not have answered, which is in our student accounts office, which is our billing office. They're the ones. So the question was, I think, when did the bills come out and when they're due? So generally students register for classes, I think in April or so. And then I think they try to send out those bills in late June or so. And then that first payment is for fall is due by July 15th. And then there's a payment plan that we have. There's multiple of them. There's, I think, a 10-month payment plan, a 5-month, and a 4-month payment plan. So there's definitely some of those. So again, that's handled by our student account office. They do send out, I believe, like monthly statements, but the student can also see that live on their PacerNet. So definitely they have to be in a payment plan or the full amount paid for them to start in the fall. So again, that July 15th is kind of because it's less than a month or about a month from that time that students are actually starting in the fall. I think also was a question about federal work study, which we're going to kind of go over employment opportunities, but federal work study, we usually have a wait list for that. So that is an on-campus job, on or off-campus job actually that students can apply for. So we have a wait list every year. So we're ending now, but let's say if students were interested, if they would contact our office directly, we would determine if they're eligible for that. And it is a need-based program. So based on their package, to seeing if there's room for it because it's a federal award. So we have to make sure that they have room for that and that they have need for that. And then we can determine whether they can receive that award. Generally, it's $3,000 for the academic year. So 1,500 fall, 1,500 spring, and they will receive a biweekly paycheck based on the hours that they actually work. So a lot of times it's used for personal costs, but some students do use that towards a payment plan to help pay for their bill. So again, it depends on the student and what their needs are. Most of our on-campus employment through federal work study, the pay is $10 an hour. We do have some off campus, which are more community service. So that's tutoring. We also have a work study student in the Marbles Museum, which is a lot of fun. And it's right down the street, working on weekends and stuff like that, and kids programming and stuff like that. And I think those positions pay actually $12 an hour. And I think that's all the questions and stuff. If there's any more in the chat, we can certainly maybe
The
talk
only
about those after.
Yeah, the only question that had come up in the chat is about work study. So I guess the only other question that I have just to clarify is like students when they receive their package, will that indicate that they are eligible for federal work study, or is that different than your process?
It's different than our process. So what we have found is that we um, find out from the students who is interested in that opportunity. Because since we have limited funds, I'll say that we were giving it to students who maybe didn't want a job or they had another off-campus job. So what we've decided to do just for the ease of the employers and the student is to find out from students who is interested in it and then making that connection. So I'll say most of our students, if they're eligible for it, then we are able to give them the award. And if they're not eligible for it, we're able to tell them pretty quickly, by looking at their situation, if they're not eligible for it. Now, some of our students don't necessarily find a job that fits for them, right? Because let's say of their class schedule or because of um just finding the right opportunity, right? Because maybe some students don't necessarily want to tutor kids or want to sit at a desk or be in the library, right? So sometimes there just isn't a right fit, right? But we do have a variety of jobs. A variety, I think even a couple years ago, we had our mascot was a work study student. So it really just depends, but we do try to work with different areas to find a good fit for the students.
Yeah. Thanks for the clarification. I will say, I'm gonna go ahead and start talking about my part of the presentation, and then we'll kind of, hopefully that will clarify some of the other questions, because a lot of the roles that I'm going to be talking about are not federal work study. They are stipend-based positions slash I know stipend sometimes can be misused. So students could get paid on a bi-weekly or a like twice in a month payment, but we have, clarified that it's a stipend as opposed to federal work study. So I'll go through and talk about some of these positions. Essentially, all of the ones that I'm going to talk about are available right now. So wanted to kind of highlight some of these because they are time sensitive. I'll give kind of a brief overview and my goal after this presentation is wrapped up, for folks who registered, I'm happy to send this copy of the presentation out to you. Tanisha, I'm happy to send it as well. So y'all can reference this information again. So just wanted to go through some of these elements. So we currently have quite a few roles that are open and accepting applications for your student. So peer mentor is one. That application will be open until February 16th. Peer tutor, which I will speak on, but this is hired on an as needed basis and it's not application based. Social media ambassador. We do have a current interest form open to students. Orientation leader, we have an application that is open until February 16th. Student Government and Programming Association has paid positions, and those applications are open until February 16th. Resident assistant, this one is the most time sensitive. So if you've heard your students speak about being an RA, or if they like their RA, or if they're interested in moving on to campus, resident assistant is a great role. That application is open until the end of day tomorrow, February 6th, tomorrow. So just wanted to go ahead and put that out there. And then admissions ambassador, they have a rolling application, but just so you have a date to nudge your student, their application will be open until about March 1st. They plan on hosting interviews in March and then offering in April, which I'll touch on again. So wanted to briefly talk about some of these roles. Like I said, I'm going to send this out, so I'm kind of going to speak off the cuff a bit, but just wanted to provide some options of what the role is going to be requiring. So peer mentor, their role is essentially to support our first year students as they transition to being part of the peace community, which is honestly a really exciting opportunity if you feel like your student likes to connect with people or likes to share information. That's what we're looking for in a peer mentor. We want them to be a resource. We want them to be a friend. We want them to be a connector. The biggest role specifics that the student would have to do is that they would be part of our orientation program, so an August commitment prior to classes beginning, about August 5th onwards. And students that are peer mentor would then also have a commitment through the fall semester, so they would actually be part of a first year seminar class. They would not be required to take the class. They would just need to have the time open in their schedule. And so being part of that class means they would partner with the faculty member as well as the students to kind of create a great environment for their first semester at Peace. Some time commitments outside of that. 5 to 6 hours a week, spending time with students if that's their own programming or programming that is happening on campus through our Office of Student Involvement. They will have to do a free training course that takes place over the summer, but they would not have to pay for said course. It would just make sure that they are prepared for the role. And the only other thing that I would mention that is a slight help if your student has taken a first year seminar piece themselves, that does help give context, but that is not a hindrance. So essentially, if your student has taken it, great, we love that. If your student hasn't taken it, that's okay. If they know piece and they want to make sure that students are getting acclimated, that's what we're looking for. Moving on to peer tutor. This one is a little bit different. Like I mentioned, it's not application based. It is kind of hired as needed. So we're looking at our students for peer tutors that are really our academic stars in those classes. If your student is always rolling up with an A plus on a test, I love that for them. That was not me in college, but I love students that are peer tutors. Some recommendations and requirements that would come through for this role is that they would have to be recommended by a professor for a specific course. They would have to have a particular grade, so at least a B or an A in the course, and have a GPA of 3.25. They also must have at least 12 credit hours completed. So just for context, if your student is currently a first year student, they are in their second semester. So moving forward, they would be able to be eligible for the role if that comes available to them. And then they would just need to commit to be available the whole semester that they would be hired for. So tutors are hired every semester previous. So if they are going to be tutoring in the spring, they're hired in the fall. So they would just need to know that throughout the entire spring semester, they would need to be tutoring students. And think of it as if your student is an education major, if your student wants to go the professorial route later on in a science-based class, kind of helping them work with other students and making sure that those other students are going to do well in classes moving forward. Talking about our social media ambassador role, this one is new and exciting. We have revamped some of the elements that we have coming out of our Office of Marketing and Communications. I remember seeing a question that had come up tied to internships that are available on campus. This is one of the roles slash the office, so the Office of Marketing and Communications, where I have previously seen students have an internship through this office. I will clarify just for the concept of internships, those can take place on campus or off campus, could be paid or unpaid, but the student is responsible for finding that internship. And we do have a great office, the Center for Student Success, where we do have career advisors that are able to meet with your student one-on-one and talk through the options and how we kind of share those opportunities out so that your student can meet that requirement because all Peace students do need to complete an internship to graduate. So, circling back to the actual requirements of the role with social media ambassador, I'm sure you all know social media is blowing up. If you haven't seen a TikTok recently, where's your phone? We're looking for students that are really interested in social media and kind of being a voice for peace. So that could be talking to students on campus about what they really like in pop culture. It could be grabbing pictures of the snowfall on campus. But essentially, they're looking to create a role that's built around these students and it's giving an opportunity to resume build, kind of creating content strategically and putting content out on different channels that will kind of stretch your student in the way of, well, what's the difference between an Instagram post or a TikTok and how do I get traction? So kind of interesting and a role that they're looking to build and kind of formulate based off of how Peace grows and changes. So if your student is a first year student, this could look completely different if they were to take on the role. Moving on to orientation leader, this is an exciting role as well. It is a little bit different. than peer mentor, but it is similar and that is tied to our new student orientation. So think of it again as that earlier August commitment before classes begin. I would say about August 5th onwards, and they would come back to campus early, go through training, participate in new student orientation, and then roll right into classes themselves. If your student is great with customer service, knows a lot about peace, or wants to know a lot about peace, likes connecting with new students, and wants to support them and their families as they transition to campus, if they're looking to kind of foster their leadership skills, these orientation leaders do facilitate small groups and kind of build connections with students so that they can make friends and kind of figure out what peace is going to be like for them, and serving in that role model piece. So later on, even if they're not an orientation leader, making themselves known that if their student were to need something, they could reach back out to them later on. These are just some of those required dates that I was talking about because I know I keep mentioning early August, so I kind of wanted to give a visual here. We are hiring for two different types of roles. So you can see on this table that I have orientation leader and then marketing and operations assistant. This is something that we are looking at for folks that are local to the Triangle area. So if they are available during the summer and are looking for an orientation-based role, we're hiring for a marketing and operations assistant. Think of it as kind of helping us get prepared for orientation. We have some events that will take place on campus during the summer that are orientation adjacent, and then actually helping out when orientation takes place. If your student's interested in both the summer pieces and then also orientation, they could apply for both, which would be an amazing opportunity. But just wanted to give a visual for some of those dates. And just for context, our first day of classes it's the 18th. It's 18th or the 19th, August 19th. Me like on a roll and then I'm completely wrong. That's hilarious. I put Denisha on the spot. I don't know if y'all can see her on the camera. That's totally my bad.
19th.
19th. So they will roll right up to where classes begin. So you can kind of see that there. So definitely a great opportunity for students that they're looking for something that is a summer commitment, but not their whole summer. Or if they are looking for something to stay around peace and kind of be involved, that would be a great opportunity for them as well. All right, RAs want to take some time. That's why I kind of blew through the other ones because there's a bit more time to think about those. I'm going to slow down a little bit and talk about the resident assistant role. A lot of students try to gravitate towards the resident assistant role, which I totally understand. There are a lot of perks that come with the role. Some of the perks that you may or may not be aware of are they are given their room, and it is a single space room. They are also given a parking pass for completing in this role. This is on top of the pay that they will receive for the role. We clarify it as a stipend, but it is something where they would get paid twice a month. So when you think of an RA, they are another arm of our professional staff that live in our residence halls, but on the student front. So they will program for students that live in their residence hall. They help serve in the on-call rotation to help with safety and accountability. They also spend a lot of time with their residents. Obviously, the place where they live is also the place where they work, but they're building relationships with those students, helping retain them. If they're passionate about peace, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for someone who's creative. Think of those bulletin boards that they'll have to make, the programs that they'll have to plan. We're also looking for students that are consistent. One of the things that we really try is having high impact touch points with our students throughout their first semester. So if your student is an RA in a first year residence hall, they're going to have intentional interactions. So did I talk to this student at least 3 times, XYZ? So making sure that they have kind of that passion for connecting with people. They also will have to attend trainings at the beginning of each semester while hired. So to clarify that, that means that if your student is hired as an RA, they will have to come to campus early and go through RA training around the same timing as orientation. So I would probably say August 5th or 6th. And then they will go through that first semester, and then winter break will happen, and then they will actually return to campus early as well. So I would say a week prior in earlier January, and then they will go through an additional training prior to their spring semester. They will also have a delayed exit date. So if your student is residential right now, you know they can kind of come and go as they please. There are dates where the residence halls close, but that actually is where the RAs step in and make sure that the residence halls are ready to close. They will typically have a day or two where they are a little bit delayed in returning home for those breaks between semesters. I will say the only other piece that's really helpful with RA is that they are really that face-to-face connection for campus resources because they are seeing those residents every day. So thinking about how they can help your student holistically, because you're living where you're working in terms of your student being an academic person and also living on campus. So the RA is experiencing the same thing. So if that's something where your student feels like their RA has helped them, this would be a great opportunity for them to kind of consider. All right, moving into admissions ambassadors. I don't know how many of you might have come to campus for a tour before your student committed to Peace, but that is a prime example of our admissions ambassadors. They are serving as that first point of contact, helping conduct tours of campus. If we have admitted student events or prospective student events, they're typically those faces that you'll see. We also have a couple different roles. So we have those tour guides. If you're like, my student is not into that, that's okay. We got other options in the admissions office. We also have student engagement callers, so they would actually call students or families and help share their experience at Peace and provide information alongside like that current student, sorry, that prospective student that they're speaking to and helping them apply. And then if they're more into the tech side of things, we have a couple student information databases where we always have ongoing projects. And so the admissions office is always looking for student support in that way. And then SGPA Executive Board, so our Student Government and Programming Association, they hire within their two branches of the organization, so advocacy and programming. There's quite a few different roles ranging from student body president, which is kind of the face of SGPA, to traditions coordinator, which is more of programming and entertainment. All of the roles that are on the SGPA executive board require an application, an interview, campaigning for the role, and then an election to fully receive the role. If they are elected, this is another paid position. And additionally, if your student's involved in any current clubs or organizations, they can only hold one other officer role. And then some of that required attendance that would be part of being part of SGPA. There are weekly meetings on Sunday nights. There are large tradition programmings that they would need to attend, and then required trainings and additional duties specific to each position. And that is kind of an overview of all of the roles that we have available that are currently hiring. As I mentioned, I am happy to send out these slides. In addition, if anyone would like me to share some of the applications and links to your student directly, feel free to drop their name in the chat and I will look up their Peace email and send it to them. The reason why I did not place all of the links and everything in this presentation is just due to the fact that they are tied to our students' emails. So you wouldn't be able to necessarily access them. And if your student has questions, if you have questions, my email is attached to the link to this invitation for the Zoom tonight. Happy to answer and clarify and send information to your student as well. As a reminder, all of these roles that I just went over are all paid positions. All of them are available for your students to be paid for their work that they're doing on campus, the impact that they're making. The only thing that I would keep in mind as far as requirements, a lot of these applications are a lot of these applications for these roles are going to require a resume. So if your student's never done a resume before, this could be a great partnership between you and your student on building out a resume for the first time, or direct them towards the Center for Student Success. We have folks that will sit down with them and help build out the resume. And then additionally, looking at most of these roles, there is going to be a GPA requirement of 2.5. So just keeping that in mind as students are applying. And then last but certainly not least, if your student is interested in any of the roles that require that early August requirement of being on campus, so RA, orientation leader, and peer mentor, the student cannot hold all of those roles at the same time. So if your student is interested in being an RA, I would encourage them to apply to be an RA. And if they're interested in being an OL or a peer mentor, have them apply. All of those timelines intersect, but the RA decision is made first. So then we will kind of decide once students have decided whether they'd like to accept the RA role or not. And we would encourage folks to apply for orientation leader and peer mentor if they're interested in less of a commitment, but they're still wanting to be involved on campus. I did see a question come through on the chat. Can a transfer student apply for one of these paid positions? Absolutely. I would totally encourage our transfer students to apply. They're a Peace student just as much as our first time in college students. I think that transfer students really do offer a great perspective, especially in the roles of orientation leader and peer mentor when we're thinking about transfer students that are coming in. So if your student themselves experienced a transfer orientation, we'll have orientation leaders supporting that as well. So definitely something to consider and share with your student. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for right now, but happy to answer other questions as well. Yes, I did see that in the chat as well, that the marketing and operations coordinator. So the marketing and operations coordinator position through orientation is a summer only position. If we're talking about the social media ambassador role, that is something that is taking place during the academic year just because you're partnering with a campus office. And I'm happy to send those links to anyone who would need those as well. Because then at that point, the Office of Marketing Communications is reaching out to people. And then I'm actually the supervisor for all the orientation based roles. So if your student had questions, I'd be happy to answer those as well. Does anyone else have any other questions that I could answer about some of these roles or that Denisha could answer about anything that's tied to financial aid?
So Megan, there's a question. Will the students be given a list of other jobs when the school year starts? Aren't there a couple of tabling sessions and welcome events?
Yes. Yes, we do have quite a few options when we're talking about the fall semester when we're all coming back and it's that busy season. And so, some of the things that I think of, Purpose at Peace, we have opportunities at the beginning of the year, and that is a large scale tabling event. There's also quite a lot of advertisement physically on campus. So, some examples we have bulletin boards all across campus. They're typically covered with flyers. So if you're interested in any roles that might be hiring, that's a great place to look. We have digital billboards around campus, so those big TV screens, look for that as well. And typically the Pacer, which is that student newsletter that comes out every week, will typically post if things are hiring as well. And similar to kind of what Denisha was talking about, we might email students, but if you're like looking to get off the wait list for federal work study, the beginning of the semester is typically when you're going to see those changing in shifts. So you'll kind of know if that will apply to you. Does anyone else have any other questions that we could kind of touch on or answer? Okay. Well, I will hang out. I think Denisha and I can hang out for a few minutes if anyone has any individual. Yes. Tanya, I will send that to Brenson Green. I will absolutely do that for you. Um, and if anyone else has any other requests to send information to students, happy to do that for you. Um, but we'll hang out. Last thing is if anyone's interested in their student applying to be an RA, that application does close tomorrow. So wanted to put that out there. There's quite a lot of time for some of the other roles, but wanted to put that out there. And hopefully we'll see you at the Peace 5K in March. And you can sign up for that on the family portal. But thank you all for being here. Denisha and I will hang out. Have a great rest of your night, y'all.
Thank you.